Have you ever watched someone who has spent 40 years controlling a story realize, live, on camera, that the story finally has the receipts? Tonight you will. Nobody in the Ed Sullivan Theater's control room spoke when Letterman placed the third document on the desk. Not the director, not the technical supervisor who had been running boards for the show for 11 years, not the production assistant near the back monitor bank who had been standing for the previous 20 minutes without noticing she had stopped moving. What she would say afterward, when someone finally asked, was that the silence in the control room had a different quality than broadcast silence. It was not the silence of people holding their breath, but the silence of people who had already exhaled and had not yet remembered to breathe again. On the studio floor, the audience was making a sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a gasp, but lived in the specific frequency between them. The sound of a crowd that has been shown something it did not expect to be shown and has not yet found the language for what it feels. The desk had 3 documents on it. Trump had not answered the first one. Letterman had not waited for him to. But to understand what those documents contained and why the audience's sound carried the weight it carried, you have to go back 11 minutes. To the moment Trump arrived at the desk and said the number out loud for what would be, without his knowing it, the last time. Cold data. This is what the evening became, stripped of every other element. January 2025, 49% approval. First week of second term, Gallup. October 2025, 43%. Net approval gone negative by 11 points. New York Times average. April 2026, 37%. Second term low. NBC Decision Desk, 63% disapproval. Half the country in strong disapproval. Net approval negative 16.6. Silver Bulletin average still declining. These were the numbers on the desk. Trump had walked in quoting a different set entirely. His entrance occupied the full corridor's width, each step placed with the deliberate weight of a man who has spent decades understanding that the pace of a powerful man's arrival is itself a form of argument. At the chair he stopped, hands to jacket, the brief inventory of surfaces before the commitment, a practiced pause that announced itself as confidence. He settled wide, claiming every available inch. His eyes found Letterman and held there, measuring. The first line came with the unhurried warmth of a man granting access rather than accepting an invitation. "David," he said, using the first name the way first names are used when the purpose is diminishment dressed as familiarity. "You look like a man who's been reading the wrong polls." He let the audience hear it. The audience gave a sound that had uncertainty running through its center. What followed occupied the next 8 minutes and was built with the precision of a structure that has been constructed so many times it requires no blueprint. He told Letterman his show had survived only because the content Trump generated gave it something to be about. He moved to relevance. Without him, late night was a scheduling placeholder between local news and infomercials, and every host in the format understood this and chose not to say it publicly, because saying it publicly would require acknowledging the source. The personal attack arrived next, gentle, which made it worse. A man, he said, whose moment of genuine cultural authority had already passed, who was now operating on the residual warmth of an earlier version of his career, who confused irony with insight and had been doing so for long enough that the confusion had become the identity. He arrived at the numbers with the ease of someone reaching for a tool he has used so many times it is worn to fit his hand. His approval ratings, he said, were the highest of any president at this point in a second term. Higher than Reagan, higher than Clinton, higher, he said. And here his voice took on the specific register of a man delivering a fact so well established that the delivery itself is a form of graciousness than any president in living memory. "The people are with me," he said. "The numbers don't lie." A man in the 4th row put his chin in his hand. Letterman had not moved. He sat with the stillness of a man who has been holding a specific piece of information for a specific amount of time and has arrived at the moment he chose, in advance, to release it. The silence he placed after Trump's final sentence lasted exactly long enough to allow the sentence to fully occupy the room and begin to be examined by the people in it. When he spoke, his voice was lower than anything he had used in the broadcast to that point. Deliberate. Each word placed with the care of a man who knows the words are sufficient and requires only that they arrive cleanly. "You keep saying this is fake," he said. "So prove it, right now, in front of everyone." One beat. He reached under the desk. He did not rush. He placed the first document on the desk surface with the flat precision of a man for whom ceremony would be redundant. A printed polling aggregate. Gallup, dated, methodology included, source citation on the footer, April 2026. Approval, 37%. Disapproval, 57%. Net -20. He placed it face up, oriented it toward the camera, and said nothing. Trump's jaw tightened. His right hand shifted on the armrest. He said Gallup was a compromised institution, that its methodology had been questioned by independent analysts, that the selection bias in its sampling framework had been documented, and that anyone who cited it as authoritative was working from a position of deliberate naivety or deliberate dishonesty. Letterman looked at him. "We have 8 more," he said. A woman in the second row went very still. Then Letterman reached under the desk again. The second document. NBC Decision Desk, April 2026. Approval, 37%. Disapproval, 63%. Strong disapproval, 50%. Letterman placed it beside the first. He read one figure aloud, not the approval number, the strong disapproval figure. He read it once and placed the document down and looked at Trump. Trump said NBC was a corrupt media organization operating as a political weapon, that its polling division had been documented as producing results engineered to serve a predetermined narrative, that the presence of 2 documents from 2 organizations did not constitute a pattern. It constituted a selection. Letterman reached under the desk. The third document, Silver Bulletin Average, April 18, 2026. Net approval, -16.6. Letterman read the figure. He placed the document beside the others. 3 columns, 3 institutions, 3 dates within the same week. The numbers did not vary by more than the margin their methodologies predicted. Trump's left hand came off the armrest. His fingers moved against his palm in the slow closing motion of someone whose processing time has exceeded its standard rate. The screen behind them changed. A timeline. Not a graphic, a reproduced document, a longitudinal polling record. The first week of the second term laid against the present week, the trajectory between them displayed in the specific format of a data table rather than a visualized graph, which is a different thing because a data table does not allow the eye to smooth the curve into something more acceptable. January 20th, 2025, 49% approval, net +9. February 2025, 46%, net -2. May 2025, 43%, net -11. October 2025, 43%, CNN average, net -11. April 2026, 37%, net -16 to 20 depending on the house. The geometry of those numbers, the shape formed by the distance between the first entry and the last, the rate of the decline, the consistency of the direction, was not ambiguous. Trump talked over the timeline. His voice built volume in the way volume is built when it cannot actually address what it is being asked to address, when it is being used as a physical substitute for an argument that is not available. Letterman did not raise his voice. He let the silence between his words carry the weight the table was already holding. "The geometry of this," he said, looking at the screen, and then at Trump, "doesn't change based on which house you believe." He paused. "The geometry is the same in all of them." The door near the production curtain opened. A woman, former senior research director at a mid-size polling organization that had conducted 3 separate national approval surveys between 2025 and 2026. Her testimony was methodological. What the surveys had shown, what the confidence intervals were, what the crosstabs indicated about the specific demographic segments in which the decline was steepest. She spoke with the precision of someone whose professional life has been organized around the principle that numbers mean what they mean and that the meaning does not change based on who is in the room when they are read. She was not there to editorialize. She named figures. She named dates. She named the demographic breakdowns: suburban women, independents, college-educated Republicans. Where the movement had been the largest and the most consistent, Trump called her a partisan analyst with an agenda calibrated to produce a specific narrative. She absorbed the characterization without visible response. "I'm not betraying the family," she said. "I'm betraying a lie." The second witness came through the same door 60 seconds later, a man who had worked as a data consultant to the campaign's internal polling operation during the first year of the second term, the period covered by the longitudinal record on the screen. He had signed a non-disclosure agreement covering his work and the materials he had reviewed. He said so without drama, and then he continued. His throat worked before the first sentence. A visible gathering, a moment of the jaw settling into place, the specific preparation of someone who has been rehearsing the distance between deciding to speak and actually speaking and has closed it. He described the internal numbers, not the public-facing figures cited in campaign communications, the internal ones. He named the specific dates on which the internal tracking had shown figures that diverged from the public claims being made in the same week. He described the instruction to manage the divergence, not to falsify. The word used internally was frame, to frame the internal findings in language that would be consistent with the public position while remaining technically defensible. When Trump rose and said, "You signed a legal agreement covering exactly this conversation," the man looked at him with the stillness of a decision that has already been made and has nothing left to be afraid of. "That belief," he said, "cost me more than any lawsuit ever could have." The audience did not erupt. A man in the far right section, back row, placed his hands together once, deliberately. The sound of it was precise and specific in the silence. The sound of a single pair of hands meeting with the particular rhythm of someone not performing applause, but producing recognition. A second person joined from the left side of the studio, across the room, as if the response was arriving in multiple places simultaneously rather than spreading from a single point. Then a row, then two. The studio filled with the slow, deliberate, real sound of hands coming together, because sitting still had become the wrong answer. Trump's breathing was audible before it was visible, a slight, accelerated quality to the chest that his posture was managing, with partial success, to contain. His hands had moved from the armrests to the desk edge and were gripping it with a firmness that rendered the knuckles pale. His posture had undergone the compression that posture undergoes when the structure supporting it is being asked to carry more than it was built for. His eyes moved through the room without settling, between the documents, the screen, the witnesses, the camera positions, the dark beyond them, and found no surface that offered what they needed. His voice worked through the familiar sequence, fabricated, coordinated. His attorneys were engaged. The legal exposure involved in what was being presented tonight would be examined before morning. He had survived worse. He was still here. The real numbers existed and would be produced, and the room would understand what it had participated in. His jaw was clenched in the way jaws are clenched when the alternatives are worse. A thin line of perspiration had appeared at the hairline. The fourth document arrived on the desk, a historical comparative table. Net approval ratings for every president at the equivalent point in their administration, compiled from the Roper Center's Presidential Approval Archive. Kennedy, positive 65. Eisenhower, positive 45. Reagan, positive 20. Clinton, positive 2. Trump, first-term equivalent point. The figure was on the page. Trump, current, negative 16.6. Letterman read the comparative figures in sequence. He did not read them quickly. He read them with the pace of a man who understands that pace is the difference between information and evidence. He placed the document beside the other three. He looked at Trump. "You've been talking about numbers for 40 years, he said. His voice was at its quietest. "There's one number on this desk. Answer it." The studio went silent in the specific way studios go silent when the silence is not a pause, but a verdict. Trump's mouth opened. The director in the control room later said the feed held on his face for 9 seconds before Trump turned toward the corridor. 9 seconds of a mouth that was open and producing nothing. The floor director at the back of the set had his headset in his hand, not on his head, having removed it at some point in the previous several minutes and not replaced it, standing in the position of a man who has forgotten to complete a motion because the motion became irrelevant. A camera operator in position 2 held her lens on the corridor entrance for 14 seconds after Trump disappeared through it. 7 minutes. First clip, live. 31 minutes. The broadcast segmented into 12 pieces, each moving at a different velocity through a different platform to a different audience. The 4 documents reproduced side by side on 3 network broadcasts before midnight. Gallup, NBC, Silver Bulletin, historical comparative. 4 columns, no commentary, the data, its own sufficient argument. The word geometry appeared as a standalone segment title on 2 platforms, displayed beneath the frozen image of Letterman's hands flat on the 4 documents. Trump's counter-statements arrived in sequence, measured first, then longer, then louder, then operating in full capitals, each promising counter-documentation that did not arrive before the next statement was posted. Each was screenshot and placed beside the specific clip it denied. Each comparison required no framing. Forums cross-referenced the polling house methodologies, the consultant's NDA registration date, the historical comparative source archive. The official counter data was not published. The numbers on the desk remained the numbers on the desk. The people who subscribe to this channel don't come for drama. They come for the moments nobody else is willing to show. Join them, subscribe, turn on notifications. The next truth is already on the table.